Hello, and welcome to another episode of Aiding Your Game, a web series where we discuss tabletop role-playing games and how to augment and enhance them. Today we're going to be talking a lot about world creation, focusing on the villains, their lairs, NPCs, their homes, and how to get your players invested into those points. So, sit tight, let's dive right in. So how do you make a dangerous world that your players really care about and can be invested in? Starting to look at some of the main aspects of your game world, let's first look at the villains and their lairs. So ultimately, every story needs a protagonist as well as an antagonist. So with the villain, there are plenty of options in any of the tabletop role-playing games, whether it's Dungeons and Dragons or Star Wars. Lots of tropes have been explored, plenty of data for you to root your villains in lore and in your game world. But the villains should not just be one-dimensional obstacles for the players to overcome and be successful. While that's very important, you as a game master should think of your villains the same way that the players think of their characters. How do you make them live and breathe? How do you make them nuanced? How do you make them actual characters in that story and not just a throwaway encounter? So choosing your villains can be a lot of fun. It also can be very daunting, depending on the leveling of your characters, what your storyline is. There's a lot of opportunity to really flesh out who your main villain is going to be prior to the game starting, and continue development while it's actually in play session. So for this example, on the villain aspect, we're going to go back to the previous episode where we talked about simple encounter building and use the threads that we started there to build upon. So in the last episode, we talked about a village called Stonebrook, and Stonebrook was in trouble. So exploring that a little bit more, let's talk about how Stonebrook is in trouble. What's the villain and how does that play into it? So the villain for Stonebrook, let's say it's going to be a ogre who is haunting the countryside in search of an easy meal. He is a fairly difficult creature for low-level characters to encounter, so it could be quite the challenge. As they explore Stonebrook, they find that some of the outer farms have been raided for everything from sheep and goats to barrels of water and casks of wine. There have been a few numerous deaths that have been violent. There has been quite a bit of destruction. This should lead the players to know that there's something large that the commoners cannot overcome, who is the primary challenge. As they explore, they discover the massive tracks. Perhaps they're having to use survival skills to check for traps, put the puzzle pieces together, you might say. Upon finding the evidence, they know that there is something large who is primarily after stealing more common goods and upsetting the area of Stonebrook. So they should surmise that this is some type of a giant creature who has quite the appetite and quite the opportunity for destructive behavior. Now, the villain that you're creating, in this case an ogre, we've already gotten just from that little bit quite a bit. He's looking for an easy way to eat and drink and generally causes mayhem in just trying to provide for himself. So that tells us a lot about the villain there. Now he should be somewhere nearby because he is on foot and just out to collect food and drink to sustain himself, possibly some shinies as well to decorate his lair. So ogres generally are fairly solitary unless they're being pressed into service. So for our ogre, let's give him a name of Ugrek. So Ugrek the ogre has been haunting and generally causing a lot of dismay to Stonebrook. Now, Ugrek the ogre does have a dwelling nearby. It's an old cavern that hasn't really been noticed by the people of Stonebrook. Ugrek, who resides in this cavern, has begun to put some of his winter stores that he's been stealing from the countryside, from the village, in there, as well as some of his shinies. Depending whether or not the players encounter him in his lair or not, make quite a bit of impact on your game. And that's something to think about as well, that you have to leave open-ended, as we talked about in our last episode. Having that open-ended means you do have to plan for either way, because you never know what your players are going to do. They could decide to try to lure him out and track him along his route, either to or from his lair. They may decide to rush into his lair to confront him head on. They may decide to set a trap and catch him in the act. It's hard to say. So the important thing is to know you have to leave it open-ended so that your players can impact the story and help with the story. You have to know a little bit more about your villain to be able to handle any of those situations. With Ugrek, let's say that while he's in his lair, he's busy sorting the goods and polishing any of the shinies that he has gotten. If he's on the path, either to or from, we need to look at him a little bit different. He's going to be on the way to, a little more prepared to smash and get things to bring back to his lair. He's going to have more of a sense of purpose, be a little more aware of his surroundings. If he's on his way from, he's going to be burdened. He's going to be still having a little bit of adrenaline, but he's going to be moving a little bit more slowly and methodical in thinking about what he's going to do with his goods once he gets them back to his lair. And then finally, if they decide to pull him out and trap him, setting some type of a trap in the village or near the village with something that he can't resist, he's going to go into it thinking that it's going to be some type of a easy haul. So he may be a little more ready for just a quick grab and dash. So different scenarios kind of lead to different ways to think about how to use your villain. Now, with the villain of Ugrek, we've decided that he's an ogre. He's collecting food and drink and shinies to hole up in his cavern, and depending on how the PCs interact with him could really determine what happens, how they address Ugrek, and ultimately what that leads to. If they end up meeting him to or from, trapping him, anything like that, it could lead to another scenario where they have to find his lair to be able to get some of that reward. Though stopping the ogre should be pretty good reward in and of itself, I can't think of very many characters who don't want some type of loot. So now that brings us back into Ugrek's cavern, into his lair. We have to think a little bit about Ugrek himself and where he would lair and what he would do inside that lair. So we mentioned he's got a cavern that's nearby. I imagine for Ugrek he's found something that he doesn't have to work very hard to get or maintain. So it's not a massive tunnel system. it's pretty much just a small cavern where he is able to set up shop, more or less. So it should have big enough room for Ugruk to be comfortable enough in, and to store some of his loot. Of course, he'll want to keep some of the meats and everything he's found cold enough to be able to go back to them. Maybe he smokes the meats in there, so there is probably some type of a massive fire pit. Areas for his barrels that he's taken off carts and from the winery, let's say, as well as some type of a trophy area for him to put any shinies he's come across. And so thinking about that, we know that his lair is going to have enough room for him to live in and to be fairly comfortable for an ogre. If the PCs encounter him there, we don't want it to be a one-room piece, because that just is a little too easy. Ugruk should be a fairly challenging encounter, so you'll want to think about him setting up his lair to be able to defend it as well. Perhaps it does have entrance that he's booby-trapped with some type of a trip line and will alert him to anybody coming in. Some type of a blockage of a doorway that he can move fairly easily as an ogre, but a simple commoner will not be able to. So as you are playing your villain, what would you do to ensure your safety and comfort? You have to think like your villain in his lair as your home, because the characters are thinking as their characters, and to be able to challenge them enough and offset it, that's going to be an important piece. So now we've established Ugruk the ogre has been terrorizing Stonebrook and has been making off with a lot of their goods and wares, and he has a lair nearby that he has got some type of defensible position with. Now I just need to wait for the PCs to weave all the strings together and see that there is definitely something large terrorizing the area, and for them to confront and overcome. Once they do overcome it, then you'll need to, of course, know what's in the lair or what's on Ugruk itself. A lot of people just go through and dish out gold, gems, jewelry, bringing a little more realism into it. What would an ogre have on him? Obviously his massive club, but in addition to that, what kind of shinies would he find interest in? Maybe it's helmets, maybe it's some of the local flags for cloth that he finds pretty. Could be something as simple as some type of a brass distillery that he just thinks is shiny and pretty. It could very well be small pouches of coin that he's taken from some of his victims. The loot that he has in his cave should reflect just that. Maybe there's loot that they can return to the village and bring some type of respite to the people who are going without. Maybe it's something that they can sell at a later date to be able to boost their own income. Maybe it's something just returning some of the stolen sheep who are just corralled in the den and are awaiting their turn on Ugruk's spit. So thinking about the villain and his lair is definitely important. You don't want to overthink it because, as mentioned, the players may decide to go in a different route. Rather than confronting Ugruk in his lair, they may want to try to set a trap for him in town. They may try to ambush him on his way to or from. Don't put too much thought into it, but don't just wing it either, because spending a little more prep time makes it feel a little more real and ultimately gives a little bit more color to your world and engagement for your players to really dive into and enjoy, and really brings the story to life. As for villains, each of your villains should do this, but as we mentioned in our last one, we don't want it to be a closed encounter either. Once Stonebrook is free from Ugruk and his carnage, what's the next step? While great to leave it up to the players to decide, don't hesitate to drive that story forward. How does that encounter and that story with Ogric terrorizing Stonebrook lead into a broader pattern of story? So definitely spend time on the villains and their layers. Don't let them be just one facet enemies to overcome and be vanquished. Even if it's something as small as a ogre terrorizing the countryside, how can you make it more impactful for your players and the characters in the story? On the same token, you do have to consider your non-player characters and their homes, because just as important to the story are the aspects of your villains and their layers, possibly even more so is the impact of the NPCs and their homes. So using again Stonebrook, the characters already know that Stonebrook is being terrorized by something, and it could be easy for them to just say, well, we need to help Stonebrook, but to really seal the deal, give a added benefit of life to Stonebrook via NPCs in their home. As the players are going through the countryside, let them meet somebody that has a big impact to them. This can be done quite a number of ways. One of the big challenges that I've suffered in my past, and I've seen on multiple tables, is so many NPCs that it's hard to keep track of and it's hard for anybody to invest in. So you don't want 5,000 NPCs that the players interact with, and Bob and John and Mary and Sue all have some need or some little bit of information. It's always good, but if you can focus more on less, you're going to enrich that story and build better character development and ties to the story. So using Stonebrook, if the PCs happen into town and head into the tavern and start hearing about the horrors that are being suffered upon Stonebrook, let one or two NPCs really drive that story. Have them meet a farmer who is completely wiped out from his bringing grains into Stonebrook, and now he is completely dismayed and doesn't know what to do. Overall, the NPCs should really cover three aspects. They should relay information, they should compel the story forward, and they should drive character engagement. So an NPC who has something in common with a character is going to be a better story hook than just an average NPC who says the village is in terror. Look at your characters for how you can utilize the NPCs. Sometimes they'll have a great backstory where you can pull items from. They were raised in a farming community that was burnt to the ground by orcs. They should already have some tie in there to helping the farming community. But your NPCs can be a great piece. As an NPC befriends a character, it should not just be one-dimensional of them telling the character that the village is in trouble and we need your help. It should be something that's felt. Our village has been terrorized, and my son, who looks just like you, was recently killed trying to help save the family farm. Our daughter, who has hair the same color as yours, was recently captured and hauled away while the entire house was smashed. Utilizing these type of aspects bring your characters more into the story. It gives them that connection that they are the ones who can ultimately help your NPCs. There are a lot of great examples of this in all different types of literature, as well as movies, TV shows. There should be a primary one or two NPCs that the characters can really get comfort with and to build some type of a bond with. These should be NPCs that are recurring NPCs. Even if your party is traveling great long distances, there should always be some type of a connect to where the NPC who was so distraught and needed the player character's help has some type of a long-term buy-in to the character's success, as well as their appreciation and respect, maybe even adoration. So utilizing these bits and pieces, start weaving in how the characters have really gotten some type of an impact from the NPCs and their surroundings. Could be as simple as the village of Stonebrook reminds one of the characters of the home that they once lost. Could be something as easily as the children playing in a yard in Stonebrook bring a character back to when they were in their youth. Look for ways to tie the NPCs' locations to the characters. Don't hesitate for that, because those are the types of items that really drive some of that character development going forward in the future. Even if your story does not depend on the character staying in Stonebrook, but just passing through, those types of developments can lead to greater and greater storytelling. Maybe it's something where the character decides they want to bring the people of Stonebrook to a safer location, or have the people of Stonebrook eventually join them as they build a capital in a far-off realm. Who knows what it could be? The point is having those elements of your NPCs and their homes forethought a little bit and given a little bit deeper color and dimension to can really add engagement to your game. This type of interaction from the NPCs to the characters, just like the villains in their layers, can really add a deeper element of reality and believability and ultimately engagement to your players themselves. When they care about the world that they're traversing, they're going to have different interactions of it. If they just roll through a town and hit the tavern up for drinking and wenching and then move on to the next dungeon crawl, while not a bad play style at all, it does have a missing element of RPG that can be a lot of fun and can drive even further storytelling, helping propel that story forward and into a deeper and deeper campaign setting. When the characters care about the world, it's easier to build stories, encounters, and your character's story into a longer term campaign setting. I hope this was helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helps bring a little bit of depth and element into your game. And of course, as always, as you think about some of these elements, don't hesitate to, down below, like, follow, subscribe. Additionally, in this one, we will also post our Kickstarter, which is beginning to run out of time. So we're looking for support there to help engage more video and better video quality. But always ask yourself, where will your adventures take you? Next, we're going to look up one of our product focuses. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, have a great gaming session. So in our product focus today, we're going to be talking about our watercolor maps. Let's dive into that. With our gaming session focus on our product, we are going to be looking at our watercolor maps. This map here is one of the several that we do with the watercolor. The basic premise is to incorporate different watercolors into a hand-drawn map. The watercolors are added into a pre-treated pelham and really designed to augment the map itself. So this is an early example here. Of course, our game maps have Each one is individual and unique. None are the same, so each one you get is different from any other. These ones here have the added watercolor for depth. Now, the majority of the ones we do are water, but we do have some with greens for the land. The watercolor fantasy maps are designed for ease of tabletop use and can be purchased separately. Additionally, they do come available in our campaign binders if they are marked with the watercolor map. So I hope you check them out on our eBay store, also located in the comments, and we would love to hear your comments and feedback on these.